3 months had passed since the Galactic Council's assessment, when the long-range sensors detected something that sent waves of panic through every civilized system in the galaxy. The readings were unmistakable, even though many had hoped never to see them again. The Devourers had returned. The ancient machine intelligence had been thought extinct for over 1,000 years, destroyed in a legendary war that had cost entire species their homeworlds. Now their distinctive energy signatures appeared at the galaxy's edge, moving inward with terrifying purpose. The fleet was massive, consisting of ships that seemed to grow and adapt even as they traveled through space. Admiral Velneth called an emergency session of the Galactic Defense Coalition. Representatives from every member species gathered via holographic communication as their fleets mobilized for what many believed would be the final war. The atmosphere was tense as reports continued to arrive about the approaching threat. The Devourer fleet consists of approximately 50,000 vessels of various sizes, reported. The chief intelligence officer, a spider-like being from the Arachnid Collective. Our analysis indicates they have advanced significantly since their last appearance. Their ships show new configurations and weapon systems we have never encountered. Commander Zexthul stood to address the assembly. His confidence from the previous meeting had been replaced by grim determination. The Korthak Empire's Crimson Guard stands ready to lead the first assault. Our disciplined formations and superior firepower will hold the line while other forces organize their defenses. The Veltar representative's crystalline form pulsed with determined light. Our energy weapon specialists will provide long-range support. The combined might of our particle beam arrays should prove effective against machine targets. The Hive delegate spoke with its collective consciousness. Our swarm tactics will overwhelm their individual units. Quantity has its own quality, and we can field more ships than any other single species. As the alien commanders outlined their strategies, Captain Monroe received a priority communication from Earth Command. The message was brief but clear. Human forces were to be assigned support roles only. Medical evacuation, supply runs, and rear area security. No frontline combat assignments. Dr. Kate Sullivan commanded the human medical frigate fleet that had been stationed at various coalition bases throughout the sector. Her ships were equipped with the most advanced medical facilities Earth could provide, staffed by experienced doctors and medics who had trained for multi-species emergency care. Commander Ben Hayes led the small escort fleet assigned to protect the medical vessels during evacuation operations. The first engagement took place in the Kepler system, where Coalition scouts had detected an advanced Devourer probe force. The plan was simple and straightforward. The Korthak Crimson Guard would engage the enemy directly, while the Veltar energy weapons specialists provided covering fire from long range. The Hive would deploy swarm formations to overwhelm any breakthrough attempts. Zexthul commanded the operation from his flagship, confident that the combined might of 3 coalition species would easily handle what appeared to be a relatively small enemy force. The initial contact seemed to confirm this optimism, as coalition weapons found their targets and began destroying Devourer vessels. However, something unprecedented began to happen. The surviving Devourer ships started to adapt their defensive systems in real time. Energy weapons that had been effective in the first minutes of combat became less and less useful, as the machine intelligence analyzed the attack patterns and developed countermeasures. The Veltar commander watched in horror as his particle beams began to have no effect on enemy shields. "They are adapting to our energy frequencies," he reported, adjusting to compensate. But every adjustment the Veltar made was countered within minutes by the Devourer adaptive systems. Worse, the machines began to mimic coalition tactics, turning the aliens' own strategies against them. When the Hive deployed swarm formations, the Devourers responded with their own swarm patterns that proved more efficient and deadly. The Korthak Crimson Guard found their disciplined formations becoming a liability as the Devourers learned to predict their movements and coordinate devastating counterattacks. Ships that had fought together for decades suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered by an enemy that seemed to know their every move before they made it. Zexthul watched, his tactical displays with growing alarm as his forces began to take heavy casualties. All units adapt your formations. Switch to backup tactical patterns. The change provided temporary relief, but within an hour the Devourers had analyzed the new patterns and adapted once again. It became clear that any consistent strategy would eventually be turned against them by an enemy that learned faster than they could change. The battle turned into a rout as coalition forces found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. The Veltar were the first to retreat, their energy weapons having become completely ineffective. The Hive's collective consciousness struggled to coordinate new tactics faster than the machine learning algorithms could adapt to them. Zexthol's own flagship came under direct assault as Devourer units demonstrated they could now mimic Korthak combat patterns perfectly. Only a desperate retreat saved the Crimson Guard from complete annihilation. As the battered coalition forces fell back to defensive positions, human medical ships moved forward to begin evacuation operations. Dr. Sullivan's teams worked frantically to rescue wounded aliens from disabled vessels while Commander Hayes's escorts fought to keep the medical ships safe. Corporal Amy Carter led a team of human medics aboard a damaged Veltar cruiser, working to stabilize the crystalline being's unique physiology while under sporadic enemy fire. The Veltar crew watched in amazement as these supposedly weak humans risked their lives repeatedly to save alien soldiers who had dismissed them as inferior. Just months earlier, similar scenes played out across the battlefield as human medical teams evacuated Korthak, Hive, and other coalition wounded. The aliens began to notice that human medics never left anyone behind, regardless of species or the tactical situation. They also observed that human escort pilots showed remarkable skill at evasive maneuvers and defensive tactics. As the coalition retreated to regroup, reports came in from other systems where similar encounters had taken place. The results were always the same: initial success followed by rapid adaptation from the Devourers, leading to devastating defeats for conventional forces. Emergency war councils convened as the scope of the threat became clear. The Devourers were not just back, they were more dangerous than ever. Their ability to adapt to any conventional military strategy made them nearly impossible to defeat using traditional tactics. High Admiral Velneth addressed the assembled coalition leadership via secure communication. "We are facing an enemy that learns from every engagement. Our standard military doctrine appears to be ineffective against their adaptive capabilities." Species representatives began to argue about alternative strategies. Some suggested developing new weapons technologies, while others proposed radical changes to their tactical approaches. However, every suggestion seemed to have the same flaw. Any consistent pattern could eventually be learned and countered by the Devourer intelligence. In the human medical stations, Dr. Sullivan treated wounded aliens while listening to their accounts of the battle. The survivors all described the same phenomenon: an enemy that seemed to become smarter and more dangerous with each passing minute of combat. Commander Hayes reviewed the tactical data from the engagements, noting patterns that the coalition military leadership seemed to be missing. The Devourer's adaptation appeared to work best against predictable, disciplined forces that followed established military doctrine. As more systems fell to the advancing Devourer fleet, it became clear that the coalition needed new ideas and new approaches. The old ways of fighting were not only ineffective, they were actively counterproductive against an enemy that could learn and adapt faster than traditional military organizations could change. The stage was being set for a conflict that would challenge every assumption about warfare, strategy, and the nature of military strength itself. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council ship buzzed with quiet conversation as representatives from dozens of alien species gathered around the central holographic display. Commander Zexthol of the Korthak Empire stood at the front of the room, his scaled green skin gleaming under the bright lights. His yellow eyes swept across the assembled crowd with obvious confidence as he prepared to deliver his assessment of humanity's military capabilities. Captain Lisa Monroe sat in the observers section alongside Sergeant Jake Rodriguez, both wearing their crisp Human Defense Corps uniforms. They had been granted permission to witness this evaluation session, though they were not allowed to speak or participate in the discussions. Monroe kept her expression neutral as she watched the alien commander arrange his data files on the podium. Zexthol activated the holographic display, showing images of human soldiers in various combat situations. The first image showed a squad of Marines carrying a wounded comrade across a battlefield while under enemy fire. The Korthak commander pointed at the display with one of his clawed fingers and let out what could only be described as a dismissive snort. "Observe this behavior," Zexthol announced to the gathering. These humans waste valuable time and resources to retrieve fallen or wounded personnel. Any logical military force would leave the injured behind and continue the mission. This emotional attachment makes them weak and inefficient in combat situations. Several alien representatives nodded in agreement. The insectoid hive delegate clicked its mandibles approvingly, while the crystalline Veltar representative's body glowed with what Monroe had learned indicated satisfaction with the assessment. The display changed to show human soldiers using kinetic weapons alongside more advanced energy weapons. Zexthul gestured at the primitive firearms with obvious contempt. "Look at these outdated projectile weapons," he continued. "While other species have moved beyond such crude technology, humans still cling to metal bullets and explosive devices. They appear unable to fully adapt to modern warfare techniques." Monroe felt her jaw tighten slightly, but she maintained her composure. Rodriguez shifted in his seat beside her, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Furthermore," Zexthul said as the display showed human military ceremonies and traditions, "they waste time on meaningless rituals and emotional displays. Their soldiers form personal attachments to their weapons, their units, and even their enemies. This sentimentality clouds their judgment and prevents them from making necessary tactical decisions." The Korthak commander brought up detailed anatomical charts, comparing humans to other species in the Galactic Defense Coalition. "Physically, they are among the weakest species we have encountered. They lack natural armor plating like my own people possess. They have no claws, fangs, or other natural weapons. Their strength is average at best, and their endurance is limited compared to species like the Veltar, who can fight for days without rest." A delegate from the Veltar civilization spoke up, her voice resonating with harmonic frequencies. "What about their technological capabilities? Surely they have some advantages in equipment or strategy." Zexthul's expression became even more dismissive. "Their technology is adequate but unremarkable. They show some creativity in engineering, but nothing that surpasses what other coalition species have already developed. Their military strategy relies heavily on these emotional bonds I mentioned earlier, which creates predictable patterns that any competent enemy could exploit." The display now showed human soldiers during training exercises. The aliens watched as the humans practiced various scenarios, working together in small teams with obvious coordination. However, Zexthul pointed out what he saw as flaws in their approach. "Notice how they refuse to abandon team members even in training simulations," he said. "They consistently choose group survival over mission completion. This makes them unsuitable for operations that require difficult tactical decisions. A proper military force must be willing to sacrifice individuals for the greater strategic goal." The Hive delegate spoke with its collective voice. "Do they show any exceptional abilities that might compensate for these weaknesses?" Zexthul considered the question for a moment. "They demonstrate some ability to adapt their tactics during combat, but this adaptability often leads to inconsistent results. They lack the disciplined precision that comes from proper military hierarchy. Their soldiers are encouraged to think independently, which creates chaos in coordinated operations." Monroe and Rodriguez exchanged a quick glance. They had both served in enough joint operations to know that human tactical flexibility was often what saved the day when rigid battle plans failed, but they remained silent. "In conclusion," Zexthul announced as he deactivated the holographic display, "while humans may prove useful as support personnel, engineers, or medical staff, they are fundamentally unsuited for frontline combat roles. Their emotional nature, physical limitations, and inefficient tactical doctrine make them a liability in serious military operations." The room filled with murmurs of agreement from most of the alien representatives. A few species remained quiet, but none spoke up to challenge the assessment. The Korthak commander looked pleased with the reception of his presentation. High Admiral Velneth of the Galactic Council stood to address the assembly. "Thank you, Commander Zexthul, for this thorough analysis. Based on this evaluation, humanity's application for full combat membership in the Galactic Defense Coalition will be reviewed accordingly. They will be offered positions in support roles commensurate with their demonstrated capabilities." The Admiral turned toward the human observers. "Captain Monroe, Sergeant Rodriguez, you are dismissed. Please convey our decision to your superiors. Earth's contributions to the Coalition will be valued in appropriate non-combat capacities." Monroe stood and saluted formally. "Understood, Admiral. We will relay your decision to Earth Command." As the two humans made their way out of the Great Hall, they could hear continued discussion about their species' limitations. The aliens spoke openly about humanity's weaknesses, apparently unconcerned that the human representatives might still be within earshot. Once they reached the corridor outside the meeting hall, Rodriguez finally spoke in a low voice. "They have no idea what they just did, do they?" Monroe allowed herself a small smile. "None whatsoever. Command expected this reaction. That's why we have the backup plans ready." They walked in silence toward their transport shuttle, both thinking about the reports they would need to file. Earth's military leadership had prepared for this scenario, knowing that alien species would likely underestimate human capabilities. The dismissive attitude they had just witnessed would make the eventual revelation all the more impactful. As their shuttle departed the Galactic Council ship, Monroe looked back at the massive vessel through the viewport. She wondered how long it would be before they saw it again, and under what circumstances that reunion might occur. Something told her it would be sooner than anyone expected. The Galactic Defense Coalition headquarters had become a place of barely controlled panic, as reports continued to arrive from the front lines. System after system fell to the advancing Devourer fleet, and every conventional military strategy had proven not just ineffective but actively harmful against an enemy that learned faster than they could adapt. Admiral Velneth stood before a holographic display, showing the current tactical situation. Red markers indicated lost systems. Yellow showed contested areas, and the shrinking patches of blue represented coalition-controlled space. The alien leader's usually calm demeanor showed cracks of stress as he addressed the emergency council session. "We have lost 17 major systems in the past 2 weeks," the admiral reported. "Our casualty rates are approaching 60% in fleet engagements. Every battle teaches the Devourers more about our tactics, while we learn nothing useful about theirs." Commander Zexthal's scaled face showed the strain of recent defeats. His once proud Crimson Guard had been reduced to less than 30% of its original strength. "Our most disciplined formations have become liabilities. The enemy predicts our movements with increasing accuracy. Traditional military hierarchy appears to be working against us." The Veltar representative's crystalline form pulsed with frustrated energy patterns. "Our analysis suggests the Devourer's machine intelligence processes tactical data faster than any biological mind can adapt. We cannot outthink a computer that learns from every microsecond of combat." Several species representatives began arguing about possible solutions. Some suggested retreating to fortified positions and waiting for the enemy to make mistakes. Others proposed developing entirely new weapons technologies that the Devourers had never encountered. However, every suggestion seemed to face the same fundamental problem. Any pattern could eventually be learned and countered. In the back of the chamber, Captain Monroe and Sergeant Rodriguez sat quietly in the observers section. They had been called to headquarters for debriefing about human medical operations during the recent battles. Their reports had mentioned several observations about Devourer behavior that the coalition leadership had initially dismissed as irrelevant. As the debate continued without reaching any productive conclusions, Admiral Velneth's aide approached him with an urgent message. The admiral read it quickly, his expression growing even more grim. "I have just received confirmation that the Zerion system has fallen. The Devourer fleet is now only 6 systems away from the Coalition's core worlds." A heavy silence fell over the chamber as the implications became clear. At their current rate of advance, the Devourers would reach the most populated areas of Coalition space within weeks. Billions of lives hung in the balance, and conventional military wisdom offered no solutions. It was then that Counselor Threshmar of the Diplomatic Corps spoke up with an unexpected suggestion. "Perhaps we should consider unconventional approaches to this problem. Are there any military traditions or techniques we have not yet explored?" Several representatives looked puzzled by the question. The Coalition's military doctrine had been developed over centuries of warfare between various species, incorporating the best tactics and strategies from each member civilization. What could they have missed? High Admiral Velneth's gaze fell on the human observers. During the recent medical evacuations, human personnel had demonstrated some unusual capabilities that had caught the attention of Coalition intelligence officers. Their medical teams had successfully rescued personnel from situations that other species had considered hopeless, and their escort pilots had shown remarkable adaptability under pressure. "Captain Monroe," the admiral said, addressing the human representative directly. Your people have been assigned to support roles during this conflict. However, I am curious about human military capabilities that may not have been fully evaluated during your initial assessment. Monroe stood and moved to the center of the chamber. Admiral, human military doctrine differs significantly from coalition standards. Our approach to warfare emphasizes adaptability, individual initiative, and tactical flexibility, rather than rigid hierarchy and predictable formations. Zexthol's yellow eyes narrowed with skepticism. We have already established that human emotional attachments and inconsistent tactics make your forces unsuitable for serious military operations. With respect, Commander, Monroe replied calmly, those same characteristics might be exactly what we need against an enemy that adapts to consistent patterns. Human soldiers are trained to think independently and change their approaches constantly. We deliberately avoid predictable behaviors that enemy forces can analyze and counter. The Hive delegates' collective voice expressed confusion. How can military forces function effectively without coordinated patterns and disciplined formations?
Chaos cannot defeat organization. Sergeant Rodriguez joined Monroe at the center of the chamber.
Our tactical doctrine is based on controlled chaos. Small unit operations with independent decision-making authority. Soldiers who can adapt their methods minute by minute based on changing conditions. We have found that unpredictability is often more valuable than perfect coordination. The Veltar representative's form flickered with interest. You are suggesting that inconsistency could be a weapon against an enemy that relies on pattern recognition? Monroe nodded. Human military history is full of examples where unconventional tactics defeated superior forces. We learned long ago that rigid military thinking can become a weakness when facing adaptable enemies. Our soldiers are taught to break rules when necessary, and to value mission success over tactical purity. Admiral Velneth considered this information carefully. The coalition was facing extinction, and conventional approaches had proven worse than useless. Perhaps it was time to try something completely different. What would human forces require to participate in frontline combat operations? Authorization to deploy our own tactical methods without interference, Monroe replied. Our soldiers work best when given mission objectives rather than detailed operational plans. We need the freedom to adapt our approaches based on battlefield conditions. Zexthol's voice carried obvious skepticism. You are asking us to trust the defense of civilization to undisciplined forces using primitive weapons and emotional decision-making. We are asking you to trust the defense of civilization to forces that cannot be easily predicted or countered by machine intelligence, Rodriguez corrected. Our emotional decision-making is exactly what makes us unpredictable. Our primitive weapons work in ways that energy-based systems do not. Our undisciplined approach means we can change tactics faster than any computer can adapt. The chamber filled with heated discussion as various species debated the merits of this unconventional proposal. Some representatives argued that desperation was driving them to consider ridiculous options. Others pointed out that conventional wisdom had already failed catastrophically. High Admiral Velneth called for order. The situation is critical enough to warrant experimental approaches. Captain Monroe, you have authorization to deploy human combat forces using your own tactical methods. However, this will be a limited trial, one engagement to assess the effectiveness of your unconventional warfare techniques. Monroe saluted formally. Understood, Admiral. We will not disappoint you. As the emergency session concluded, representatives from various species approached the human officers with questions about their proposed tactics. The concept of deliberately unpredictable military behavior was alien to most coalition species. But desperation was making them willing to consider options they would have dismissed under normal circumstances. Commander Zexthol approached Monroe as the chamber emptied. Captain, I hope you understand the stakes involved here. If human tactics prove as ineffective as I suspect, the coalition's remaining forces will be committed to a doomed strategy. Monroe met his gaze steadily. Commander, human tactics have been underestimated before. Sometimes that works in our favor. As the human officers left the headquarters to begin preparations for their first combat deployment, they carried with them the hopes and doubts of an entire galactic civilization. The next engagement would determine whether human military doctrine could succeed where conventional warfare had failed, or whether the galaxy would fall to an enemy that had learned to defeat every predictable strategy. The Kepler system became the testing ground for humanity's first major combat deployment against the Devourers. Captain Monroe had carefully selected a diverse group of human military personnel, representing different branches and specialties. Marine Lieutenant Dan Foster led an infantry squad that included Sergeants Alex Turner and Maria Gonzalez, both veterans of Earth's most challenging conflicts. Navy pilot Commander Ryan Clark commanded a fighter squadron, known for their unconventional tactics. Army Rangers under Captain Steve Wright specialized in infiltration and sabotage operations that other species considered impossible. The coalition's battle plan placed human forces in what commanders considered appropriate support roles. They would provide reconnaissance data and assist with evacuation operations while the remaining Veltar and Korthak forces engaged the enemy directly. However, Monroe had given her unit commanders broad, discretionary authority to adapt their missions based on battlefield conditions. Lieutenant Foster's Marine Squad was assigned to gather intelligence on Devourer ground operations from a supposedly safe observation post on Kepler's third moon. The position offered excellent sensor coverage of the main battle area, while keeping the humans out of direct combat. At least that was the plan. The engagement began according to standard coalition doctrine. Veltar energy weapons opened fire on the Devourer fleet from maximum range, while Korthak forces moved into formation for a coordinated assault. Initial results seemed promising as several enemy vessels took damage from the opening barrage. However, within minutes the familiar pattern began to repeat itself. Devourer shields adapted to the energy weapon frequencies, reducing their effectiveness dramatically. The machine ships began to analyze coalition movement patterns and coordinate increasingly effective counterattacks. It was then that Lieutenant Foster's squad detected a Devourer probe unit that had landed on their moon, apparently conducting its own reconnaissance mission. According to their orders, the Marines should have reported the contact and withdrawn to a safer position. Instead, Foster made a decision that would change the course of the war. "Squad, we have enemy contact at grid reference 77 Alpha," Foster announced over the communication system. "Rules of engagement are now in effect. Turner, Gonzalez, weapons free." The Marine assault on the Devourer probe unit was unlike anything the machines had encountered before. Sergeant Turner used improvised explosive devices created from standard equipment in ways that defied conventional military logic. Instead of following established demolition procedures, he combined materials in unpredictable ways that created unique blast patterns and effects. Maria Gonzalez employed psychological warfare techniques that confused the Devourer sensors. She used sound projection devices to create false audio signatures, deployed reflective materials to confuse optical targeting systems, and even used personal items as decoys to misdirect enemy fire. Her tactics made no sense from a purely logical standpoint, but they worked. Most importantly, when Private Kevin Hayes was wounded by Devourer energy fire, the entire squad immediately moved to protect and evacuate him. This behavior, which Commander Zexthol had specifically criticized as inefficient, proved to be the key to their success. The Devourer probe unit's artificial intelligence was designed to predict and counter logical military behavior. It could analyze weapon patterns, movement formations, and tactical decisions with incredible speed and accuracy. However, it could not process actions that appeared to contradict basic military efficiency. When the human Marines risked their tactical advantage to save a wounded comrade, the Devourer intelligence experienced something unprecedented: uncertainty. The decision made no logical sense from a military perspective, yet it clearly served some purpose that the machines could not calculate. Meanwhile, Commander Clark's fighter squadron was demonstrating similar unpredictability in space combat. Instead of maintaining tight formations like other coalition pilots, the human fighters broke into individual combat styles that reflected each pilot's personal training and experience. Pilot Sarah Walsh discovered that her energy weapons were being adapted to by Devourer shields, so she immediately switched to kinetic rounds and ramming tactics. When those proved less effective than hoped, she began using her fighter's drive exhaust as a weapon, directing superheated plasma at enemy sensors and weapon systems. Captain Tony Lee employed evasive maneuvers that violated every principle of efficient space combat. His flight patterns were so erratic that they confused both enemy targeting systems and friendly observers. However, his survival rate was significantly higher than pilots who used standard coalition tactics. The breakthrough came when Captain Wright's Rangers managed to infiltrate a Devourer command ship using stealth, techniques that predated space combat by thousands of years. Wright led his team through the enemy vessel's maintenance passages, avoiding detection by using methods that machine intelligence had no reference points for. The Rangers moved through the ship like ghosts, using hand signals instead of electronic communication, carrying chemical explosives instead of energy weapons, and employing infiltration techniques learned from ancient Earth conflicts. When they reached the ship's central processing core, they planted charges that were designed to create maximum psychological impact rather than optimal structural damage. The explosion that destroyed the Devourer command ship was accompanied by a data burst that Wright had programmed to transmit what appeared to be human emotional responses. The machine intelligence received signals that it interpreted as fear, anger, and determination, concepts that it had no framework for understanding. More importantly, the human units began coordinating with alien forces in ways that defied conventional military hierarchy. Dr. Sullivan's medical teams had earned the respect and trust of alien soldiers through their previous rescue operations. This emotional bond created cooperation that transcended species barriers and military protocols. When Sergeant Rodriguez's unit came under heavy fire while trying to rescue a wounded Korthak officer, they called for assistance from nearby Veltar forces. The crystalline beings responded not because of military orders, but because they had witnessed human medics risking their lives to save Veltar, personnel in previous engagements. The trust-based cooperation that emerged from these emotional connections created tactical possibilities that no military computer could predict or counter. Units from different species began working together based on mutual respect rather than rigid command structures, creating unpredictable alliances that changed minute by minute based on battlefield conditions. Commander Zexthul observed these developments from his flagship with growing amazement. He watched human forces coordinate attacks using methods that made no logical sense, yet proved devastatingly effective against an enemy that had previously adapted to every coalition strategy. The Devourer fleet began to experience systematic failures as their adaptation algorithms struggled to process human tactical behavior. Every time the machines thought they had identified a pattern, the humans would change their approach in ways that seemed to prioritize emotional factors over tactical efficiency. When Captain Morrison's destroyer found itself surrounded by enemy vessels, she ordered a ramming attack at the exact moment when retreat would have been the logical choice. The unexpected maneuver destroyed a critical Devourer relay ship and disrupted their fleet coordination. At a crucial moment in the battle, the engagement ended with the Devourer forces withdrawing from the Kepler system for the first time since their return. Coalition losses were significantly lower than in previous battles, and for the first time, the machine intelligence had been forced to retreat rather than adapt and overcome. As the human forces regrouped and prepared their after-action reports, alien officers approached them with questions about their unconventional methods. The concept of deliberately unpredictable tactics was beginning to make sense to species that had previously dismissed human military capabilities. Commander Zexthul requested a private meeting with Captain Monroe. "Your forces performed beyond our expectations," he admitted. "However, I still do not understand how chaos and emotion can be more effective than discipline and logic." Monroe smiled slightly. "Commander, the strongest fortresses can be defeated by enemies who refuse to attack where they are expected. Sometimes the best strategy is to have no strategy at all." The final confrontation came sooner than anyone expected when long-range sensors detected the main Devourer fleet moving directly toward Earth itself. The machine intelligence had apparently decided that humanity represented the most dangerous threat to their expansion and needed to be eliminated immediately. The entire remaining coalition fleet gathered in Earth's solar system for what everyone understood would be the last battle. High Admiral Velneth had restructured the entire command hierarchy based on the lessons learned from human tactical successes. Instead of rigid formations and predictable strategies, coalition forces were organized into flexible battle groups with human advisors integrated throughout the fleet. Commander Monroe found herself in overall tactical command, a responsibility that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The most surprising development was Commander Zexthul's request to serve directly under human command. The proud Korthak warrior had witnessed human tactical methods firsthand and wanted to learn how emotional decision-making could be incorporated into military strategy. Monroe assigned him to work alongside Sergeant Rodriguez's unit, forcing the alien commander to observe human methods at the squad level. The Devourer fleet that approached Earth was massive beyond anything previously encountered. Thousands of ships in configurations that seemed to shift and change as they traveled through space. The machine intelligence had been learning from every engagement, and their vessels now incorporated countermeasures for every known coalition tactic and weapon system. As the enemy fleet entered the outer solar system, Captain Monroe activated the coalition's new tactical approach. Instead of meeting the Devourers with organized formations, human-led battle groups spread throughout the system in apparently random patterns. Each group operated independently with mission objectives rather than detailed battle plans. Lieutenant Foster's Marines had been assigned to defend one of Earth's orbital stations, but he received authorization to interpret his mission broadly. When Devourer landing forces approached the station, Foster made a decision that epitomized human tactical thinking. Instead of establishing defensive positions, he led his squad in a direct assault on the enemy landing craft. The attack made no logical sense from a defensive standpoint, but it caught the Devourer forces completely off guard. Sergeant Turner used mining charges from the station's construction supplies to create improvised weapons that the machines had never encountered. Maria Gonzalez coordinated with the station's civilian population to create chaos that confused enemy sensors and targeting systems. When Private Hayes was injured during the assault, the squad's response demonstrated the power of human emotional bonds. Every Marine immediately moved to protect their wounded comrade, but they did so in ways that turned the rescue into a tactical advantage. Their desperate determination to save Hayes created fighting intensity that no machine intelligence could calculate or predict. Commander Zexthal witnessed this behavior firsthand and finally understood what human officers had been trying to explain. The emotional attachment that he had criticized as weakness actually created strength that transcended individual capabilities. The Marines fought not just for victory but for each other, and this motivation made them far more dangerous than any purely logical force. In space, Commander Clark's fighter pilots were engaging Devourer vessels using tactics that evolved minute by minute. Pilot Sarah Walsh discovered that ramming attacks were particularly effective against machine ships because the artificial intelligence could not comprehend suicidal tactics used for tactical advantage rather than desperation. Her seemingly reckless maneuvers destroyed several enemy vessels that had adapted to every conventional weapon system. Captain Wright's Rangers achieved the most spectacular success of the battle when they managed to infiltrate the Devourer command ship using methods that predated space warfare by millennia. Wright led his team through the massive vessel's structure using techniques learned from ancient Earth military history, moving like shadows through corridors designed by machine logic. The Rangers planted explosives throughout the ship, but more importantly, they transmitted data bursts containing human cultural information directly into the Devourer network. The machine intelligence found itself trying to process human music, poetry, and art alongside tactical data, creating unprecedented confusion in their decision-making algorithms. The turning point came when Captain Morrison's destroyer coordinated with alien forces in a way that demonstrated the true power of human tactical thinking. Morrison had earned the trust of both Veltar and Korthak crews through previous joint operations, and this emotional bond allowed for cooperation that transcended normal military protocols. When the destroyer found itself at the center of a massive Devourer formation, Morrison made a decision that combined human intuition with alien capabilities. Instead of following any established tactical doctrine, she coordinated a simultaneous attack that used Korthak kinetic weapons, Veltar energy beams, and human guidance systems in a combination that no computer could have predicted. The attack succeeded not because of superior firepower, but because the Devourer fleet could not adapt to tactics that changed constantly based on emotional factors, rather than logical analysis. Every time the machine intelligence thought it had identified a pattern, human officers would make decisions based on intuition, loyalty, or pure stubborn determination. Dr. Sullivan's medical teams played a crucial role in maintaining the emotional bonds that made human tactics possible. As the battle raged, human medics continued to risk their lives saving alien personnel, demonstrating the self-sacrifice that had initially been dismissed as military weakness but proved to be humanity's greatest strength, the Devourer Central. Intelligence began making increasingly desperate moves as its adaptation. Algorithms failed to process human behavior patterns. The perfect logical thinking that had made the machines nearly invincible became a weakness when faced with beings who refused to follow predictable patterns. The final moments of the battle demonstrated everything that made human warfare unique. Sergeant Rodriguez led a mixed unit of humans and aliens in an assault on a critical Devourer relay station. The attack succeeded not because of superior equipment or tactics, but because every member of the unit was willing to sacrifice themselves for their comrades, regardless of species. When the Devourer fleet finally began to retreat, it was not because they had been outfought in any conventional sense. The machine intelligence had been defeated by opponents who used emotion as a weapon, who made decisions based on loyalty rather than logic, and who turned their supposed weaknesses into tactical advantages. Commander Zexthal stood beside Sergeant Rodriguez as they watched the enemy fleet withdraw from Earth's solar system. The Korthak commander's understanding of warfare had been fundamentally changed by what he had witnessed. "I begin to understand," he said quietly. "Your strength comes not from logic or discipline, but from connections that transcend individual survival." Rodriguez nodded. "That's what makes us human. We fight not just for ourselves, but for something bigger than ourselves." The aftermath of the battle saw fundamental changes in how the Galactic Defense Coalition approached military strategy. Human tactical advisors were requested by species throughout the galaxy, not for their technology or firepower, but for their ability to think creatively and fight with both logic and heart. Admiral Velneth formally welcomed humanity as full members of the coalition, acknowledging that what alien species had initially seen as weaknesses were actually humanity's greatest military assets. The emotional bonds, tactical unpredictability, and willingness to sacrifice for others that had been dismissed as primitive behaviors proved to be exactly what the galaxy needed to defend itself against pure logical thinking. "Captain," Monroe accepted the coalition's offer on behalf of Earth, knowing that humans would now serve not as junior partners, but as teachers of a new kind of warfare that combined the best of logical strategy with the unpredictable power of emotion and sacrifice. The final scene showed human and alien soldiers training together, with Zexthal learning from Rodriguez that true military strength came not from following rules, but from knowing when and how to break them for the greater good. The galaxy had discovered that sometimes the most illogical behavior could be the most tactically sound approach to defending what mattered most.